Hi, this is Stan, and you are in for a treat today because you're going to learn more by accident than most places by design, because we have an audition for a podcast program. Now, you need to do that too sometime, but right now we're going to hear more and interesting and funny and clever stuff that you've never heard before, and it is our version of Car Talk, and the program begins right now. Hi, this is Stan once again for our What It Takes Radio Weekend Edition, where we just have all kinds of interesting ideas. Take a time off from all of the workday stuff and all of that workday mess and news and just, hey, during the weekend, let's think about things that are really important and things that are fun to think about. Interesting ideas. And one of the ideas we have is I discovered a gentleman who has everything there is to know about Route 66, and he's fascinating. But I found out that he not only is a Route 66 guy, he's a car guy. And Jim Hinckley, welcome to the program.
Well, sir, thank you. With an introduction like that, I'll probably need a bigger hat.
Well,
that'll cause my head to swell a bit.
Well, let me just say this. Hey, Jim is doing what you should do. He's an adventurer, he's an entrepreneur, and he's done a number of things, but now he's trying to think, maybe I should do a podcast. I like to talk, I like to meet people, and I love cars. And so we're trying to decide what kind of car program he should do. And so you get to listen in to his self-audition. Does that describe it, Jim?
Well, that's pretty good, Stan. Pretty good.
Okay. It's your turn. Your town.
I'm not even sure where to begin. I started out my writing career with, people told me I had a God-given gift for telling people where to go. And I spent most of my life on the road, truck driving. My folks teased me that I was potty trained on the road. And, but you can't tell the story of the road without talking about the cars. And you can't tell the story about the cars without talking about the people behind them. So one thing led to another, and now I've written a few books and written a few articles. I've launched Jim Hinckley's America's a multifaceted travel program. But the one component that I haven't really added to the mix, if you will, is a program about the vehicles and the people behind them. And I think that's the next step in this evolution. It's a pretty interesting story when you think of that the first person ever struck and killed by an automobile in the United States was and I'm not sure how slow Mr. Bliss was, but he was struck and killed by an electric taxi cab in New York City in the 1890s. And you start thinking about all these different stories to be yet to be told. And my pa always said it was better to fill the head with useless knowledge than no knowledge at all. And stories of the auto industry and the men behind it, and the women behind it. You know, there's a lot of information there to fill in those empty spots. For example, like David Buick. We know the name Buick from his automobiles, but a lot of people don't know that Mr. Buick gave us the cast iron bathtub. He patented the method for fixing porcelain to cast iron, and he had a very successful plumbing business. And David Buick's life story is kind of tragic. It's a story about every time a man's ship comes in, he's down at the train depot. He just misses it entirely. And it's stories of inspiration. People like Charles Nash, a forgotten, abandoned orphan who grows up to become the president of Buick at about age 24 and the president of General Motors and launches his own automotive empire. A true rags to riches story. And it's stories of people like Walter Chrysler and Louis Chevrolet and Henry Ford and some of the forgotten people like John Willis and Ralph Teeter. Ralph is an incredible story. He is the inventor of cruise control. and he perfected electric razors and gyroscope mechanisms for torpedoes. But the most amazing thing about Mr. Teeter, and speaking of inspirational stories, Mr. Teeter was blind since age 5. These are the kind of stories I'd like to share, stories of inspiration, stories that provide a laugh, stories that, when people look at their Ford, they see something different. They think about the people behind that name. And that's kind of the direction I'd like to go with this.
This is fascinating. I'm already ready to sign up. Tell me more.
Really, this whole thing is rooted in, I don't want to turn this into a therapy session, if you will, but all my writing projects, my presentations, my speaking engagements internationally, a lot of them center on Route 66, but that's intertwined with the auto industry. And I try to add depth and context to subjects, to things that are flat. We think of Route 66, we think of neon and tail fins. And we forget about some of the great, exciting chapters like the Bunyan Derby, the Transcontinental Foot Race, things of this nature. And it's the same with the auto industry. We mention antique cars, we think of Ford. We don't realize that there were over 3,000 automobile companies in the United States during those years. And each was innovative, and each was contributed to the evolution of the auto industry. Some were manifestations of extreme eccentricity, and others were truly brilliant, outside-the-box thinking that was decades ahead of their time. For me personally, it all really goes back to a quest. I was trying to find information about my grandfather. And the short version of a very, very long story is my father passed away last year in the house he was born in on Hinckley Boulevard in Vandercook Lake outside of Jackson, Michigan. And as a boy, we'd go visit my grandmother, and there was a picture on the mantle of my grandfather and Henry Ford on the front porch of the house. Well, my grandfather was born in 1865, so I never met the fella. But every time I'd ask my dad or my grandma about this, I always got pretty much the same answer. My grandma would say, well, Fred and Henry did things together. That was it. My dad never talked about the past at all. What do you want to know about that for? That's over. That's then. In his later years, I did a recording with him just before he passed, and he mentioned meeting Henry Ford several times. So my quest to know more about my grandfather led to, it fueled a growing hunger to know more about that period, 1885 through World War II. And it's an extraordinary time period. Just imagine, if you will, Buffalo Bill Cody buying a Michigan Roadster in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and learning to drive. Buffalo Bill Cody being a board member for the directors of the National Old Trails Road Association, which was a predecessor to Route 66. Imagine a Civil War veteran entering an automobile race in 1909. And the stories just keep building and building. And it's not just men. We have the Patterson Greenfield Automobile Company, a great story, never told. Here's a family that started out, the founding of the company. He was born a slave, learned a bit of blacksmithing. After the Civil War, he moved north, started a blacksmith shop, then started building carriages and wagons. And after the turn of the century, well, he and his son started building automobiles. And it wasn't an overly profitable endeavor, so they did what they do best. They started building bodies for automobiles, bus bodies for companies like Corbett, a truck builder in North Carolina. And you have things with women. For example, like say, better to fill the head with useless knowledge than no knowledge at all. But the electric windshield wiper, the first person to take a patent out was a woman. And turn signals, brake lights, all invented and patented by women. And then you have stories, incredible stories of cross-country trips in 1901, 1903, and the things these people went through. They were true pioneers. And Some of the stories are comedic, some are dark, all are inspirational. But these are the kind of things I would like to delve in more with a program about the automotive industry. And it's centered on the American auto industry, but there too, this is an international situation. For example, if you want to stir up some people, tell them that Chevrolet is an import. That'll get some attention. Louis Chevrolet was born on Christmas Day in a part of Switzerland that later became France, and he came to the United States in the employ of Fiat. So there's an international component to this as well. The fact that American Bantam, that company became the cornerstone for Japan's first automobile company, Datsun. And it just goes on and on and on. There's so many interconnected pieces to this, and so many fascinating and bizarre things. Can you imagine, Stan, creating an automobile with laminated paper mache body panels on wood framing?
No. Really?
I'm thinking it's a good idea. Or creating a car with a 154-inch wheelbase that has 8 wheels, because in your mind, if you have 8 wheels, your tires will last longer. And then you have things like the Stanley Brothers. Even if you're not a car enthusiast, most people have heard of the Stanley Steamer. Well, the steam car that the Stanley Brothers built was one of their later endeavors. These two identical twin brothers started out as musicians. They were both loved the violin. They had an uncle teach them how to make violins. That remained a hobby for the rest of their life, manufacturing violins. But they invented their first claim to fame, aside from that, was they developed a dry plate photographic process that led to the film negative, and they patented it. And they sold those patents to fund their automotive enterprise. They sold those patents to a fellow named Eastman, who went on to put together a nice little company called Eastman Kodak. And, of course, the Stanley Brothers continued with their automotive endeavors, but they had other things they were involved with. A hotel in the movie The Shining in Colorado. It was a resort built by the Stanley Brothers. And, we talked about Route 66 when we got this thing going, Stan, but, that too is part of the story, the development and evolution of the U.S. highway system. Kind of late coming. We didn't have a real highway system until 1926, and believe it or not, it was 1952 before US 6 was fully paved at the Utah-Nevada line. So I think this would be really, we could really give people lots of information if they end up on Jeopardy. We can give people lots of information if they're fascinated with cars, if they're fascinated with people, if they want inspirational stories. If they want stories they can use when they hit rock bottom, they can look at people like David Buick and say, God, I thought I had it bad.
Oh, my goodness.
Provide all kinds of inspiration.
Now I want to hear the story of David Buick, but that would be a good first episode, wouldn't it?
Yeah, David Buick is quite the character. He did very well with his plumbing business. He was an immigrant to the United States, and he had quite a plumbing business going, got involved with automobiles, and patented one of the first valve-in head engines and started a little company there in Jackson, Michigan. And but he just was so obsessed with tinkering and inventing, and he had no head for business. And so he was going nowhere. And around 1900, 1901, the auto industry had morphed from literal circus sideshow curiosity, something Montgomery Ward said, take the children to see before the fad passes, into million-dollar industry, multi-million-dollar industries. And everybody wanted in on it. It was like the Wild West. And Benjamin Briscoe and his brothers, Benjamin was a sheet metal manufacturer out of Detroit, desperately wanted in on the auto business. So he invested in David Buick and lost a bunch of money. And he was so happy to unload that company and sell it to a fellow named William Durant. And Mr. Durant used Buick, the company, as the cornerstone to build General Motors. And unfortunately, part of the package was David Buick. And the poor man just got drug around, and finally he went out on his own. And, well, short version of the story, when he died, he was working the information desk at the Detroit Library.
Oh, my goodness. Well,
Yes.
Jim, as I said, I'm looking forward to the program because I will not only love to produce your program, but I will be one of your biggest fans, and I know that a number of people would love to hear the stories. And I can sense a little deeper stuff because what you're talking about is a spirit of creativity, of entrepreneurialism, of risk-taking, of connectedness that is part of the really, as you say, the American story. That's
Yes.
part of our greatness.
Well, just a quick story, another one, as I mentioned Charles Nash earlier. Charles Nash is one of my heroes, I guess you might say. He was bound out as an orphan, and what that meant was if you couldn't pay for your kid, take care of him, you could drop him off at the courthouse, basically. And he had a very rough upbringing from that point. Left at one point, ran away as a young man, went to work on farms, went to work in a store, largely self-taught, working a job, putting himself through school, buying books. And I believe he was like age 24. He ended up as the GM of Buick. And he started out as a cushion stuffer. Let me see if I can get away from that.
Is your dog chasing the car?
No, it's the neighbor's dog.
Well, we're just sitting here on the porch talking cars. Bound to happen.
It is. But Mr. Nash, he went to work for Mr. Durant when Durant was co-owners in the Durant-Dort Wagon Company, and they had another company, the Flint Road Cart Company. And they hired Charles Nash as a cushion stuffer. And Mr. Nash proved his worth quickly, moved up through the company, and when Durant got into the auto business, he pulled Nash along with him. And Nash became president of Buick, and then he went on to become president of General Motors. And then he started his own automobile company, the Nash Automobile Company, Nash Ramblers, Jeffrey 4x4 trucks. And he had really interesting business practices. He didn't want an office door because he wanted to be approachable. And when they installed new equipment in the factory, he would put on overalls. And he would be there during installation. He would learn the equipment, and he would work with the men on the factory floor to learn how the business worked. And he took care of his people. When they were having massive labor troubles in the 1930s, automobile unions were being formed, things of this nature, they could not get a foothold at Nash because he took such good care of his employees with medical care, with low-interest home loans, with educational programs. They didn't see any reason to unionize. And Mr. Nash had a long, productive, and inspirational life.
And I never knew that. I never thought of that. We hear the name Nash and we think, oh, that's a long-dead automobile. But it comes out of an incredible legacy of American creativity and all that's good about this country.
Yeah, exactly right. And, the ups and downs of things. Henry Ford, people don't realize his Ford Motor Company was his third attempt. And they don't realize that Henry Ford's second company ended up being the cornerstone for the establishment of Cadillac.
And they did the Edsel, too.
Well, the Edsel, that poor Edsel, it looked like a Buick sucking a lemon. That was Henry Ford's son, was Edsel. And Edsel was quite a genius in his own right. He developed Lincoln as a luxury car brand. He played a key role in the development of the Model A Ford, the Lincoln Zephyr, the V12 Lincoln Zephyr in the late 30s. And he was quite an interesting fellow. And tying that to Route 66, in the summer of 1915, Edsel Ford and his college buddies set out west to go to the Panama Pacific Exposition in California. And as with tourists continues to this day, he wanted to see the Painted Desert, the Petrified Forest, the Grand Canyon, the wonders of the Southwest. So they followed the National Old Trails Road. Here in the Southwest, after 1926, the National Old Trails Road became Route 66.
Oh, my goodness. There's the story. Jim, you got to do more of this. Now, I'm going to ask you one more question. Where do you learn all this good stuff? How do you do that? A little bit of your storytelling research process, and then we're just going to have a big vote, and you'll be voted in as the podcaster to be for 2021. Okay?
Well, sounds good to me. I enjoy sharing stories. I enjoy telling people where to go. I like inspiring people. And I like providing, like I say, depth and context to subjects. And I like showing people that, contrary to what we learned in high school, history is not as boring and dead as an insurance seminar.
Well, I've been to a number of those, and they are. Well, tell people right now how they can reach out to you. You've got Jim Hinckley's America, and he's got Route 66, and obviously he's got a lot of other interests. And we're going to try and see if we can start a new phenomenon. Jim Hinckley's Car Talk for America will be the new Car Talk stories. How can they reach out to you?
Well, real simple. JimHinckleysAmerica.com. And it's Hinkley. So it's Jim Hinckley's America. And .com is my website. And I'm also Jim Hinckley's America on Facebook.
And there they can reach out to you and find out that you do lots of things. Most of them legal, right?
Well, it all boils down to this. My dearest friends and I are used to eating on a regular basis, and I'm doing everything I can to continue doing that. And if I can continue doing that and provide a smile, a little inspiration, tell a few stories, life doesn't get much better than that. That's truly a blessed fella.
You are blessed. And I can guarantee you, just by the smile you've put on my face, and as I can oftentimes say, one of the best things is to learn more here than you could by things or designed. People try to design learning, and here, you learn by accident, and you have fun doing that. So that's great. Great stuff. So they can reach you out at that thing, and you sign off, and we'll get back to you. And I think we're going to try to put together Jim Hinckley's America. And why don't you suggest a title for him, all right? What would be the title of this great program that he's going to do that might just reach most of the world, but truly Jim Hinckley's America? Jim, all the best and blessings to you, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Stan.
Now, wasn't that just a whole lot of fun? Jim is a remarkable guy, and the stories, and the stories, and the stories. And I found this so deeply connected to so many good things. He's an interesting man with interesting ideas, and I'm hoping that he will decide that he's going to be a regular part of the podcast experience so he can share all of his delightful stories, wisdom, insight, truth, and certainly a wonderful sense of humor with all of you. And so we're glad that this is what we're all about. Interesting Ideas is a weekend edition of What It Takes Radio, and we're hoping that people just like you and Jim will decide that you want to have hey, may I audition too? Well, Jim passed his audition, and you probably will too. So why don't you raise your hand? Okay, I see that hand, and just say stanhouston@gmail.com, stanhouston@gmail.com, and tell us a little bit of your story. And you know what? We'll certainly be in touch with you. And perhaps you too will be on worldwide radio with your story, with your interesting ideas and your interesting personality, and something that'll make the world smile and perhaps be just a little bit better from that day on. All the best and blessings to you all. I'm Stan Houston for Interesting Ideas. Bye for now.